Hello and welcome to your first ever JQuery tutorial. Today, as you see, we'll be talking about JQuery, which is something new to us. And so to learn JQuery, you need to have a basic knowledge of HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So to sum up what JQuery is, it is basically a lightweight JavaScript library. And so the purpose of JQuery is to make it much easier to use JavaScript on your web page. And to start, as you see, we have to actually download JQuery by going to jQuery.com. And when you get to this website, it's really easy. What we're going to do is we're going to click on download JQuery. We're going to go down here and you're going to click on download the compressed production JQuery. So my version is 3.3.1. However, yours could be an updated version or whatever, and so go ahead and download it. Just put it on your desktop, just like this. I have it here. And so as you see, its name is jQuery 3.3.1 main.js. So go ahead and copy this. Let's go back to our code. So what we're going to do is inside of our head section, we're just going to go ahead and type in script and src, so the source, which is basically the name of the jQuery, and so that's this. And let's go ahead and close our script tag. So now let's go ahead and understand a simple jQuery feature. And so what we're going to do in our HTML area, we're going to make a div and we're going to give it a ID, and its ID, let's say, is D1. Go ahead and close your div. Let's give it some simple code in CSS, so go ahead and write this. Let's also go ahead and add in a button, and let's give it a ID, and its ID will be B1. And let's write something like click me, just like we always do, and close your button. Now using jQuery, let's go ahead and try and write a simple functionality, let's say. So we should get something like an alert in the click of a button. And so for this, after our button, go ahead and open your script tags. And inside of our script tags, what we're going to write is, so the $, which we're familiar with, and we're going to write our ID in a hashtag with B1, so the button ID, and I'm going to write dot click, and I'm going to open my function like this. Just like we did in JavaScript, we're just going to write a alert inside. Let's go ahead and write something like hello. Now let's save this. Let's close out of this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to refresh, and when we click on our button, we're going to get this alert which will say hello. Now something to not forget is that you need to have your jQuery file in the same place as your HTML file. So if you have a folder or something, keep them both in the same folder, or if they're on the desktop, keep them in the desktop. Now what you're probably thinking is how we got this to work with this random gibberish, and so let's just understand this code. So as you see, I've inserted a $, which is basically in jQuery defining or letting us access the jQuery, and then we have brackets with our B1 ID, which is basically our selector. So it's a selector to query or find, in this case, the HTML elements, which is the B1 ID for us right here. And then we've added a dot and click, which is a jQuery action to be performed on the elements. It's basically called a handler or just a jQuery action. And so we're starting the function right here, and the click function completes our code inside of our curly braces, which is basically alert with the hello, and if we click on the button we get the alert. And so our selectors are basically one of the most important parts of the JQuery library. The selectors allow you to select and manipulate HTML elements, and they're used to find or select HTML elements based on their name, ID, classes, types, attributes, values of attributes, and much more. It is basically based on the existing CSS selectors, if you remember from our old lessons, and in addition it has some own custom selectors. And just like we see right here, all selectors in JQuery start with the $sign and brackets. So as I mentioned, the selectors can also find other things, so it doesn't have to be ID, and we can easily go ahead and change this ID to class. However, we will have to also change this hashtag for a dot. So just like we do it with our CSS selectors, as we can see right here. So just as we were talking about selectors, let's try something else. So instead of this alert line, let's go ahead and hide our div, in which we'll use JQuery's hide function. And so let's go ahead and get rid of this, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna write our $sign, which starts off our JQuery code, and we're gonna write our selector as well. In our case, we want the div to be hidden, which is the D1, and we're gonna write a hashtag D1. And so this is our selector, and we're gonna write hide. So this is the hide function in JQuery, and we're gonna give it its time, which we will write in milliseconds. So I'll write 2000, which is basically 2 seconds. So what this code means is that the div needs to complete this given task, so it needs to be hidden in the given 2 seconds. So if we go ahead and save and refresh, and if I click on the button, we'll see that our div is now completely gone, and it took it 2 seconds. And so let's do that one more time, and let me go ahead and make some adjustments to my div. Let's make it the other way around, and as we see, still works. Duplicate this button, however let's change its class to B2, and let's also change the text inside. Let's change the first one to click me to hide, and let's change the second one to click me to show. And let's also copy this, paste it here, and now what we need to do to get it to actually work, we need to change this B1 to a B2. And we're not done just yet, as this still says hide, and what we're gonna do is we're just going to simply change it for show. And now if I save, refresh, we see that we now have 2 buttons, click me to hide, click me to show. And if I click on click me to hide, my div is going to hide, it's going to disappear. However, now if I want it to come back, I'm going to click on the to show button, and we see that the div comes back. And so if we want to see that one more time, we hide the div and we get the div back with these 2 buttons. Pretty easy stuff. And we can do the same exact thing with just 1 button. And let's go ahead and duplicate this button line again. Let's change B2 for B3, and now what we're gonna do is we're going to change its text as well. So we can write hide and a slash, so hide or show. And we also need to copy this again, paste it, and now what we're gonna do is we're going to change this for B3, and we also need to change show. So we need to change the action, and what we're gonna write here is toggle, and we can change the millisecond as well. So let's change it to 1 second, and if I save and refresh, and now let's discuss all of them. And let me just make my div a little bit bigger. And so now if I click on click me to hide, my div is going to hide. If I click on it again, nothing will happen. If I click on click me to show, I will get my div back, and if I click on it again, nothing will happen. However, now if we click on our multifunctional button, so the click me to hide or show button, I will hide my div, and if I click on it, I will also get it back. So this is how we do it with just one button. And so we see that everything right here in the script tags, so our jQuery code is working perfectly fine. However, if we were to cut it out of here, and if we were to paste it before our HTML elements, if I was to save and refresh, we'll see that absolutely nothing happens. And I believe we've gone through this before. Our browser starts from the top section, so our divs, and then it moves down to the scripts, which basically make no sense as there is nothing above here, so there's no elements which will toggle these jQuery codes to work. That's why it doesn't work. And so the reason why it wouldn't work is because if this was to be right here instead of our elements, the browser would meet the B1 class, which is not to be seen anywhere up here. It hasn't met it yet, if that makes sense. And then there's the B2 element, there's the D1 ID, which is nowhere to be seen right here, and it is down here, which is why it won't work. Our elements are at the bottom, which need to be at the top. And so there is actually a solution for this using jQuery. So what we can do is just right here, we can go ahead and type in our $, and in brackets we'll write the selector, which is documents, and ready, and open your function just like this. And what we do is we take its closing curly brace and the brackets, and we'll move it down here. So what this does is basically a page can't be manipulated safely until the document is ready. jQuery detects this state of readiness for us, and so code included inside of the document ready will only run once the page document object model DOM is ready for JavaScript code to execute. And so what this will do is our browser will read the file fully. So the full thing will be read immediately, and it will still work. So as you see, my elements are down here, and my jQuery code is right here, and it still works perfectly fine. And to move on, let's go ahead and discuss some other ways of hiding our div. And so as we see, if we click on click me to hide, both the width and height get hidden, and if we click on show, both the width and height show up. And so what we can do besides the hide function in JavaScript, we can duplicate this, and instead of writing hide, we can write something called the slide up method. And let's see how this works. And if I click on click me to hide, we see that only the height, well basically from the height, is being hidden. So it's not from both the width and the height, it's just the height. And we can do the same things with our B2 and B3 buttons as well. I can duplicate this, comment on the first one, and instead of show, I can type in slide down. So the opposite, which will actually do the same thing. So if I click on click me to hide, and then if I click on click me to show, it will basically slide down. It's a self-explanatory kind of action. And for B3, what we can do is instead of just toggle, we can write something called slide toggle, just like this. If I save and refresh, we see the result. So it's basically these two combined, just as we know, and it slides up and down. And let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about another way of hiding divs. And so we can duplicate this again, comment on the first one, and instead of slide up, what we can write is fade out. So this is basically going to fade out, self-explanatory again. And for the second button, what we can do is we can write fade. Oh, I made a mistake here. Fade. What I can do is I can write fade in, which will basically fade in, self-explanatory. And let's duplicate this, comment on this, and instead of slide toggle, we're gonna write fade toggle. And let's save and see what happens. When I click on click me to hide, we see that in the 2 seconds given, it basically fades out. And when we click on click me to show, it will take it 2 seconds to fade back in. And this will basically be the merged version of the both. Fades out, fades in. Works perfectly fine. So we can hide the divs using this action as well. Now let's just go ahead and continue work with our divs. And so we're still working with our document ready function. So inside it, just at the bottom, what we're gonna do is we're going to write our $, and we're going to go ahead and type in our div. And so just to not mix it up, as it's an ID, we're going to use a hashtag, and we're gonna write D1, and we're gonna write hover. So this action basically is a hover feature. And let's go ahead and open our function as well, like this. And so inside of it, we're going to write our $, once more, and we're going to use CSS for this code. So go ahead and type in your div ID div as well, and we're going to take the action using CSS. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a background change. So go ahead and type in background color, and we're going to write a comma, and we're going to write its value. So let's say we want red, we're going to type red. And if I go ahead and save this, and when I hover on my div, we'll see that it turns immediately to red. And it's blue right now. I'm hovering on my page. However, when I hover on my div, it's going to turn into a red color. And we can also easily change the values to whatever we'd like. It doesn't really matter. See, it turned into pink. And yes, just so on. It doesn't really matter. So let's move on, and let's go ahead and add in some text in our div. So we can just write text, and let's give this text some designs using CSS with JQuery. And so as we see right here, we have one CSS property, which is the background color with the value red. And if we want to add another property, so we need to have two properties, what we're going to do is we can duplicate this, comment on the first one, it doesn't exactly really matter. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in some curly braces, just like this, and this comma is going to turn into a colon. So this is how we would write it in normal CSS if it was to be in the style tags right here. And now let's go ahead and add in another CSS property, which is going to be font size, and we need to add in the quotation marks as well, don't forget. And we're gonna add in a colon, and let's say 7VW. And so when we refresh, we see that our text has been added into our div, and it is a aqua color. However, when we hover on it, we'll get a bigger text size, and it will turn to red due to our CSS codes using JQuery right here. So our two properties. And so just like in CSS, we can easily delete this hashtag D1 ID, and we can just write div, which is basically doing the same thing as in CSS. So all of the divs on our page will be selected, and when we hover on it, you see that it works perfectly fine. And still working with divs, let's go ahead and copy this div line. And as we know, we can't have the same IDs for all of them, So let's just keep it simple without any IDs. And what we're gonna do is we're going to duplicate these lines a couple times and get rid of the IDs, as we can't have them for all of them, and just keep this first div with the ID D1. And in our CSS code, let's change this D1 to div, so it should work for all of them. And so as we see, we get a lot of divs. If we hover on any div, they will get the given properties. And so as we see, it works if we hover on any of the divs, and it works for all of them. However, now let's say we have a problem where we only want the one that we hover on to work, and so we're going to do this using JQuery. So instead of the div CSS, we're going to change it to this, and let's get rid of these quotation marks. And so basically what this is that when we select the div and when we hover on it, whichever div that is being hovered on, the CSS code will work. And let's go ahead and save, refresh, and let's say I want to hover on this one. We see that it turns red with the bigger font size, and we can do it for this one, and we can do it for this one, and so on. I can do it for all of them, just like this. And we'll talk about this selector more some other time, and we'll start using it more often, just so we have a better understanding of it. Let's discuss about something else in jQuery. Let's duplicate this, and instead of hover, let's write something which is mouse down. And let's go ahead and save, refresh. And so as we see, when we hover on our divs, nothing happens. However, if I click on one and I hold on it, so if I'm holding on to the left click of the mouse, we see that we get the bigger text size with the red, and it just stays there. And then if we click on this one, same thing will happen, same thing with this. So mouse down basically when you click on it and you hold it. And so we see that this is almost immediate as when you click and hold on it. And let's discuss another jQuery feature, which is not mouse down but mouse up. And if I save, refresh, and when I click on anything, nothing will happen. However, if I let go, it will turn red with the bigger font size. So I'm clicking on it right now and I'm holding on to it, and if I let go, it will change. So the other one was immediate. Mouse down was immediate. This one is after you let go of the click. And so there's also something called mouse over. So instead of up, let's go ahead and type in mouse over. And if I go ahead and save, refresh, and we see that when we click and we let go, it immediately works. So click, etc. So this works basically when the event is triggered. So that is how mouse over works, and let's move on. And so let's also talk about the mouse leave action. So this works when you basically leave the div, if that makes sense. If I click on it, nothing happens. Hovering on it does nothing. If I move my mouse, it will immediately get the changes through the CSS properties. And the same thing with the other divs. If I'm on the first one, and if I move it down to the second one, or the third one even, both of those will get the CSS functions. And if I'm holding on this one, if I'm hovering over it, and if I leave it, it will turn red. And let's go ahead and move on. Let's comment on this code. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in a $, and we're going to write this jQuery feature again. And what we're going to do is we're going to add something new, which is fade to, and it's self-explanatory. It's an action which basically sort of fades it to a certain transparency, and we're going to give let's say, the value of slow and the transparency to 0.15. And let's get rid of these quotation marks, and let's go ahead and save, refresh. And now, as we see, after hovering over our divs, they sort of fade out to a certain transparency. And let's do it one more time. And by the way, it works only after when you leave the div, so when your mouse hover leaves the div. So as you see, nothing is happening. When I leave it, it will fade out. And we can easily change the transparency of our divs. So if it's 0.15, we can change it to something like 0.5. And if I save and refresh, we see that it is a slight transparency, so it's basically half, as the range of the values here is from 0 to 1. And let me just show you it really quickly. If I put it on 0.1, and if we save and refresh, we're gonna see that it's like really transparent. However, if I put it to 0.9, and when we save and refresh, we can see that it does actually get transparent a tiny bit, so as it's like really close to its full color number. And lastly, let's move on and do something else. Let's go ahead and still inside of this, let's write a new code. Do this. So inside of here, go ahead and write in your $sign. And if we want to add something new to this, let's go ahead and add in a input with the ID of I1, for example. And inside of here, let's go ahead and type in our ID I1, and we're going to type in the focus feature or function of JQuery, which is self-explanatory. It basically focuses on whatever we're hovering over, if that or we're clicking on, to be exact. Let's go ahead and use this CSS feature using jQuery, and we also need to change this D1 to this, so whichever div we're clicking on, and it's only one property, so we're going to use the comma without any of the colons. And let's go ahead and try this, and so we see that we get our input, and when we click on it, it takes the background color red, just like we have right here due to our CSS code. And so yeah, that was all that I had prepared for today's jQuery tutorial. Thank you so much for watching.